Today we're going to talk about marathon training for those of you who may be wondering if you are ready to tackle that beast. Getting to a half marathon is a huge accomplishment, and once you have been doing that for several races, you may be thinking you would like to try a marathon. For myself, I remember a half marathon I ran in Japan when we lived there, which was at the base of Mount Fuji. And it sucked. It was super hot, and there were elevations that I wasn't considering would be at the base. And since we had to run the route twice, it was mentally taxing to know I had to do the same stuff I thought was terrible again. So I vowed never to run another half marathon again. And of course, a few years later, I was going to turn 50, and I decided, no, I'm going to run a marathon to celebrate. So I had a lot of time to train because at that point I was living in Shanghai and I had no kids with me, and we lived sort of outside of the area that expats live. So I did a lot of running because I didn't really know anybody, which brings me to one of the ways you can know you're ready. Have you run a half marathon, or are you at least running like 10 miles as your long run consistently? You're going to have to run a lot longer than that in training. So if 10 miles is still feeling really taxing, you may want to train and run a few more halves or your first one. When that 10 miler doesn't take you out for days on end, that's a good measure of readiness for the training that you're going to need for a marathon. If you're running 10-mile long runs, you're probably running 20 to 25 miles a week in total volume, and that's another indicator that the marathon may be for you. Again, we're talking consistently. Just because you ran a 10-miler a month ago and haven't since, and didn't before that, it doesn't bode well for building up the long runs on a weekly basis that you're going to need to do. And if you haven't run another 10er because you're experiencing like little niggles or injury, postpone that marathon training until you're healed and you've built your base back up. Talk to a doctor or physical therapist if you do have injuries. Getting the all clear from a doctor or therapist is one of the quickest and safest ways to get back to the running that you love. If you don't love it, maybe rethink the marathon. I'm not saying you have to have all-encompassing passion for the sport, but if it takes a ton of motivation to get you out the door for 5 miles, it's gonna take a lot more when you have to get to 18 or 20. So we talk about the marathon being a mental game, but the training for it is also mentally taxing. In training, there's no crowd to cheer you on, no one's handing you water, so you have to carry hydration yourself. There's no sweeper bus picking you up if you can't go on, or like I've done a few times, finished my run miles before I get back to my house. Not to mention you feel like crap, and you can't imagine you're going to be ready 26.2 when 16 feels like death. You're also in the experimentation phase for your fueling strategy. You also might want to puke or poop in the middle of nowhere, and I know I'm sounding like I'm telling you not to run a marathon. I actually love training and running marathons, and while mentally and physically draining, it's also pretty darn fun. So my point in sounding negative is to bring up the negatives and have you think them through before you commit to a marathon. They're expensive, they take a lot of time out of your life, so even if your body has all the boxes checked for being ready, you have to make sure that this is something that you want to do for you. Because the last thing I will mention is your life needs to be ready for the training as well. Long runs cannot be sacrificed for the most part. And yes, you could skip or postpone or do a shorter fatigued long run once or twice. But if the long run isn't something that you can put on your schedule week after week, you'll need to wait until life is a bit more predictable for you. Also decide if financially you are ready. Running shoes need to be changed out after a certain amount of time. You can watch my recommendations here, and you will need a way to carry hydration and fuel. You will also need to pay for registration. And Some of these races are pretty expensive. And unless you have one in your time frame in your city, there's going to be travel and lodging expenses. So make part of planning your marathon saving up for one. So add up the physical, emotional, mental, time, expense, and financial considerations. And if you're ready to go, welcome to the fantastic world of marathon training. I'm Coach Sherry, also known as the Wrinkled Runner, and I do in-person training in Buffalo, New York, and also have a virtual option for those of you who live elsewhere. You can check out my coaching offerings using the link in the description. If you want to know more about what a coach can do for you, you can watch this video. You can also listen to my podcast or search for running articles on wrinkledrunner.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the run.